Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so honored and so wicked happy that you'll join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show, and please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher Radio, Himalaya, Ghana, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Jeff Lindberg. He's here to celebrate Coney, a trip to Luna Park. Before we invite Jeff into the studio, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by Easter eggs and matzo balls, brand new book from our friend Janie Emmaus. This is Janie's second blended holiday book, illustrated once again by the amazing Brian Langdo. In this humorous and endearing story, blending both Easter and Passover, a young boy wants the Easter Bunny to bring his stepsister something special in the golden egg. He suggests various Passover items, but even after squishing and squashing, the Easter Bunny can't make any of them fit. In the end, the boy does more than find something special. He saves his new sister's favorite part of Passover. It's a joyful, engaging read, perfect for culturally blended families and delightful for everyone. The playful rhymes will keep kids giggling, and Janie's family matzo ball soup recipe included at the end is to die for. Get your copy today. Easter eggs and matzo balls, written by our friend Janie Emmaus. Join us right now from the beautiful Garden State of New Jersey. Our guest is here today to celebrate an absolutely beautiful picture book. It's called Coney, A Trip to Luna Park. Please welcome to the show the author and illustrator, Jeff Lindberg. Jeff, how are you?
Hi, Jed. I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Wonderful. I'm really excited to talk to you about Coney, A Trip to Luna Park. I visited Coney Island and I guess Luna Park once. I rode on the Comet, and it was a great experience, but it was probably many decades after Coney Island's kind of bright point, or you know, when it was at its peak.
You mean like its heyday?
Heyday. That was the word. Thank you. That was the word I was struggling desperately to find and wasn't able to find it.
Well, it has its. Some would argue it's having its heyday now too, but my book takes place in 1904. I got hooked into this initially. I've always loved Coney Island. I love amusement parks. I was always obsessed with amusement parks and fairground architecture and all that. But when I discovered that the word Coney comes from the Dutch word for rabbit, the light bulb went off in my head, and I just said, what did the rabbits feel like when they were in fields or whatever in Coney Island? And then all of a sudden, an amusement park is built right on where they live, right on top of their home. So that was the initial germination of the story. That was back in the 90s when I was still living in Brooklyn. And then that sat on dormant for a while. But then I started thinking further, and then I started looking at pictures of the Library of Congress, pictures of Coney Island from 1904. And I don't know if you visited the Library of Congress or check out the pictures there. I encourage anyone who wants to look at history, just go there. It's all free. But the resolution on these pictures from back then is incredible. And I felt like I was stepping back in time. And so I decided I want to do a book which would allow the reader, children and adults alike, to go back in time and visit it. And I decided to make it from the perspective of the rabbit. And I had all kinds of other iterations of the story, and this is another lesson for anybody who's out there listening to this who needs to not make the mistake I made. Hire an editor. I would decide to self-publish, and I thought I can write, and I can write, but I'm really an illustrator. I'm sure you saw my illustrations. I've been an illustrator for a long time. That's my main thing, but I have story ideas. But when I just hired an editor and she listened to it, I sent her the material. She happened to move to England at the time, but she had done some real picture books. She was a series editor, and she read it and she said, "You've got too many characters. Mm-hmm. There's no dramatic arc in here." And I'm like, "Oh man, I know this stuff. I watch Hitchcock. I know about dramatic arc, but there was none." So she helped me to fashion it, and then we had to get rid of characters. But the main character, Millie, is based on my granddaughter. My son is married to a woman who already had 2 children. Now I have a granddaughter of my own who's little. My granddaughter, Millie, was at the time like 12. And I said, "Millie's my character." So Millie became the character along with Selena the rabbit, and they meet in Coney Island. And they basically, I don't know if we would tell the whole story right now. No. If you want to ask me a question, we can work it in parts.
Yeah, no, I love this idea of taking kids back to the early 1900s and amusement parks, because the world was very different back then. Amusement parks, my son lives in Orlando, so every time we go down to Orlando, we have to go to Disney World, which is a beautiful, magical place. But it's a very different place than Coney Island or Paragon Park that was here in Boston. And it's, kids just don't understand that. And I think a lot of parents don't understand either what things were like at the turn of the last century.
Well, you mentioned Disney, and that's kind of key for me. I love Disney. Mm-hmm. So you gave me a little aside about some people. I know there's different feelings about Disney. I love animation. I love cartoons. It's what is in my brain all the time, and that's why I make pictures. And in part because I grew up as a kid watching Disney, and true, there was problems with the Disney Corporation at some points in their history, but I don't know if Walt Disney visited Luna Park, but he had to have at some point, or knew about it, because when Luna Park was built in 1904, all across the country, different Luna Parks sprung up. In the Midwest, there's actually a Luna Park in Australia, which was inspired originally by the idea of having a park that could take people someplace magical. And that's what I wanted to convey. That's what Walt Disney did. You mentioned Walt Disney World or Disneyland. He was trying to do that too. In my book, the character is Fred Thompson. Fred Thompson is in the story, and I make sure I put in there about how Fred Thompson is a real person. His partner, Skip Dundee, is the bad guy in the story. And Millie and Selena end up butting heads with them because Fred Thompson builds his park right on top of where Selena the rabbit lives. So that kind of cemented the friendship between Millie and Selena. And Fred Thompson ends up being a good guy. Skip is a bad guy who, in my world, and I often talk about Bob Ross, as this is my world, I can make it this way. The bad guy learns a lesson and repents. Now, I know in this world it doesn't always happen that way. But for me, I could make it that way. But Fred Thompson created the park. He designed it. And, he was ahead of his time in terms of creating rides. He created the original dark ride, which, for those of you who don't know, a dark ride is any ride you get into and it gets dark, and you take this ride and it takes you through. In my book, there is a trip to the moon. And there was a trip to the moon that Fred Thompson designed, which you would get into this big flying ship where it would have wings that would flap and dry ice and stuff. And they would simulate flight by having painted back side drops of, paintings along the side of the ship that would drop, that made people feel like they were lifting. And it would take them to the moon. And then they would get on the moon. They would be visited at the time by little people. Back then they called them midgets, not politically correct, not right. By little people who were the Selenites. They were moon people. This actually existed. and people would walk around, and then there would be a gift shop at the end of it. This is the prototype for Disney, what Disney did, or Coney Island, going forward, as along with roller coasters and all that other stuff, which are in the book too. So I created the images based on a lot of the things that I saw in the Library of Congress and other research. I'm kind of an amateur historian on this. I probably did too much research, but
Well, one of the things that you brought up that I think is really important, because we do speak to a lot of authors and aspiring authors, and that lesson that you learned about sharing, bringing your book to an editor to have it professionally edited. And again, a lot of people think, edited. Oh, yeah, I have my wife and my spouse. My wife is an English teacher, and so she can catch all the typos. No, an editor actually helps you shape your book and develop that dramatic arc, and really turn it into from a paper that you turn into your high school teacher and turn it into a real book.
Yeah, the editor, and she said I needed an antagonist, a bad guy. So I made Skip Dundee, who was a real partner of Fred Thompson's, but first of all, I had to make sure about libel laws. I didn't know if I could be sued by the family of Fred Thompson or the family of. It turns out that if the people you're writing about are deceased, you really can't be sued for libel. Mm-hmm. So I thought, that's a relief. But I also put in that it's based on real people, but it's my fictionalized version of that. Mm-hmm. But there's a part where Skip is really kind of nasty to Selena and Millie. In fact, he says at one point in the book, he says, "We like to eat little rabbits," he says, something like that. And I've gotten a fair amount of reviews already, and some people have said they had problems with that, and I understand, but it all ends up okay. So in most cases, everybody is like, okay, it works out fine. But according to the editor, I needed to set up that tension. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, I just had the characters kind of floating through Luna Park in this dreamlike, and they rode on a roller coaster, but it wasn't really exciting. I speak about another illustrator, famous genius. I don't like the word genius. Maurice Sendak. Mm-hmm. What he did, Where the Wild Things Are, he was criticized by librarians and educators because they felt that the story was too dark for children. Mm-hmm. But Sendak said famously, and so did Dr. Seuss, by the way, I don't write for children. I write for myself. Now, that's the way they think. And in part, I understand that, but mm-hmm. I also want kids to read with them. I'm told that some people that have read the book to their children, that they love the book and they want to read it again and again. Mm-hmm. So that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd love to talk to you about your art. It's really beautiful. And, I'm always curious as to, a process especially for author illustrators. And now you shared with us that, the story kind of grew and an editor kind of led you in a certain direction. I'm always curious as to what drives an author illustrator story. Is it do the illustrations and the idea for the illustrations come first and then the story fits that, or is the story driving what the illustrations are going to look like?
That's a really good question, because I've spoken with other artists. I think words first, even though I'm an illustrator. But that's also part of the illustrator's job, is you get handed. I used to do book covers for the YA market. Some of those. Started out doing romance novels, with the cover, with the romance and the clinch and all that. That's where I crafted my technique. Mm-hmm. But the words were always led by somebody gave me a story and they said, "We want you to illustrate the story." Oftentimes an editor would say to me, "This is the section we want you to illustrate." So I'm always thinking words first. So even with my own story, it was words first. Mm-hmm. And then the images would fit that. Whereas I know some illustrators, they don't think words first. They think image first. And I guess people who do picture books that are just only pictures, maybe that's the way they think. You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
It is words first.
It is fascinating. And, you know, the illustrations, it really fits the time frame of the story, because it has they're really bright, they're really colorful. I think they're really going to appeal to kids, but it definitely has that kind of old, early 1900s feel to them.
Thank you. I'm glad you saw that. It's also part because I'm like a real nerd about researching, so I wanted the costumes to look right. I had to look to see, is that what the shoe looked like? I get very nitty gritty. You know, there's a section of my book where my granddaughter's because I happened to just about put the book out, and then she was born. I thought, I could put Willow in the book. So I had to make sure that the carriage that she was in was there in 1904. I'm very obsessive about this stuff. But technically speaking, people who make art, this may be relevant. I came from an era where I was creating art as a painter, so it's pencils, watercolors, acrylics, oils, creating the art, on paper. And most of this book was created on paper. But then at some point, I realized I wanted to do digital. I had to do digital stuff to be able to produce it. So I scanned everything in my little scanner in 8 little pieces, and then I stitched together in Photoshop, and then I put the typography, and I made some color enhancements digital over it. But what you see, the core of the artwork is really pen and ink, because there's a lot of pen and ink and watercolor. Then there are some full-blown paintings, which are acrylics and oils. Wow. And I'm looking over here now, and there's artwork around me here. It's not a big studio, but I wanted the book to feel traditional in that sense. For people that do buy the book, it's printed offset, so it's got a dust cover and all that too. And I'm just learning about this. I listened to one of your podcasts before about somebody talking about being a promoter. It's like, whoa, it's very natural talking with you, I got to say. It's a weird dichotomy because as an illustrator, you spend a lot of time alone, as I said before. But when I get a chance to be in front of people, and Jed, I know you can relate to this, Jed. When you're in front of people, all of a sudden it's like, man, the lights go off in your head, and you're like something else. It's kind of crazy, right?
It is the energy that you get from being in front of a live audience, whether it's an audience of 10 kids at a book reading, or in front of 1,800, 2,500 kids in a big theater. It's really fun, and it really is inspiring, and I just love it, as I know you love it, and I can't wait. I'm going to be back on stage in 2 days, and so I'm really looking forward to that.
That's cool. Yeah, no, it's part of the reason I made the book was so that I get the opportunity to do that. But then, you get a little bit, I'm sure people out there self-publishing, I know what the big publishers are like, and I know that they'll only want to, they have a mindset. J.K. Rowling was turned down by virtually every publisher in New York until she finally hit it with somebody. I think it was Scholastic. And I'm no J.K. Rowling. She's wonderful. But it's hard to be seen. But now with technology, I can do it myself.
Yeah.
Except for the hiring of the editor, and other people looking at the book. You can do more of the things yourself. I can self-publish.
Yep.
Because if I was to go through a major publisher, they're not going to see me. I know this because I knew a lot of people in the industry. They're going to want me to be represented by a literary agent. A literary agent is not going to see. There's too many gatekeepers before you get to, the wizard. Who is somebody behind a curtain. Yeah, that's another story.
but you're right. We're living in a time right now. You and I are similar age. The idea of a kid from Brooklyn, a kid from the inner city of Boston, getting a break and getting published or getting on TV or whatnot. That's really far-fetched. But now we're in an age where kids have the ability, they have this little rectangular thing in their pocket that allows them to create videos and upload it, and the videos or the audio that they create is going to be heard or seen by people all over the world. And
yeah, it's awesome.
It is. Speaking of all over the world, we have an illustrator who's helped us create our series, our Reading with Your Kids, all families series of logos. It's a simple logo, but in the middle of each logo features a different family reading together. And we wanted to create this to just to back up our mission that we're here to help all families grow closer through reading. And this series of logos was created by a young illustrator in the Philippines that somehow we connected on social media. And so I love what she's doing. I am happy that she's able to help us and we're able to help launch her. So I oftentimes will ask an illustrator for some advice. And I know that you shared with us that you kind of started in this business doing cover art for YA titles, for romance novels. Cover art can make or break a book. And there's a certain recipe that I have no idea about. But if you could give a little bit of advice to not only Daylene in the Philippines, but other aspiring illustrators out there of what's the one or two things that are necessary in cover art that's going to help get people to pick up a book?
I think, for me, when I would create an illustration, and there's different markets. There's the trade publishing market, but my work tended to be more suited to the mass market area, mm-hmm. which is more, the images were more bright, let's mm-hmm. say. They wanted more, but you need to capture a moment. There's a moment in the book, it's almost at the height of a book or something, like for something that's flashing in my head is a moment where a little girl is going to summer camp and the kids play pranks on her. And the low point for her was when they sabotaged her bed, so when she jumped on her bed, she fell to the ground. So that moment of surprise, of I'm falling to the ground, that's eye-catching because it's about movement. It's catching that moment, mm-hmm. and that could be whatever style you work in. It also needs to, I think that's the major thing is what is the high point of the book and how are you capturing that? And usually it's about a moment in time. Mm-hmm. I think in terms of time, years ago I wanted to go into animation. I didn't, but I'm a huge fan of Pixar and Disney and all the stuff they do with animation. So I think you've got to make your cover animated. That's what will grab you. If you look at my cover on the book, if anybody checks it out, you've got the rabbit flying across, mm-hmm. which was actually my wife's idea because I had an illustration that had two rabbits flying across. And I had another version of the cover, and she said, it's not very lively. And here I am, a cover artist, and I didn't see it. But through the beauty of Photoshop, I can then cut out parts of it and basically collage it together into the cover I have now, which is it needs to be dynamic. Mm-hmm. And that has nothing to do with the style you work in. Mm-hmm. And to anyone who wants to be cover art, the first thing I'd say, and this is what I tell all my students too, which they're reluctant to do, is sketch. Just do thumbnail sketches. Just do roughs, And the rough, you'll find out when you do the rough sketch of the figure flying through here or this figure here or whatever the motion is, the initial sketch is probably going to be very similar to what you end up with at the end. Mm. They say eye-catching, Mm-hmm. One good thing in frustration, I did R.L. Stine's first book.
Oh.
I mentioned this because if you look at the cover, it's my illustration, and the title is Blind Date, and the lower right-hand corner is a little R.L. Stine. Because it was his first book, mm-hmm. He was about to be released from Scholastic. He came out with this book, And the editor comes out to me when she saw me and she says, you know that illustration you did for us? That book's doing really well. So I said, that's cool. And then a few years later, I still R.L. Stein. Now his name is like Stephen King. Mm-hmm. It's at the top. It's at the top. But I didn't get the gig. This is... They gave it to somebody else, and my suspicion is they didn't like my agent at the time. So, other message to all of you out there, be careful who reps you, because, you may have had that, Jed. You may have had agents work for you. And
I don't have agents. I learned really quickly I had a not ideal experience my first few months with an agent, and I said, I think I can figure this out by myself, and thankfully I did. And it helped that I was doing schools, and I could get directly, in contact with PTAs and principals and all that.
And they're not taking their 25% or whatever.
They're not taking that. Yep, absolutely. Jeff, I know that people are going to want to know where they can go to see that cover art, to see that rabbit flying through the air, and that in front of the roller coaster with the lights and everything. It makes it feel like the whole cover art, that everything is moving, and it really is eye-catching. So I know they want to see that. I know they want to know where they can go to buy the book, and I think they want to know a little bit more about you. So where should they go?
The Coney Book website. So it's www.coneybook.com.
We've had a really fun time speaking to the author and illustrator of Coney, A Trip to Luna Park. Our guest has been Jeff Lindberg. Jeff, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, Jed. It was a lot of fun.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Vivian Kirkfield. She'll be here to celebrate her 50 Precious Words Writing Challenge. It's a great contest open to both kids and adults, both aspiring authors, writers, whoever. It's open to everybody. We hope you'll join us and check it out and maybe get involved yourself. Should be a lot of fun. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our guest, Jeff Lindberg. Please be sure to check out Coney, A Trip to Luna Park. Also want to thank our sponsor, Janie Emmaus. Please be sure to check out her brand new book. It's Easter Eggs and Matzo Balls, Janie's second blended holiday book. I want to thank my amazing team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Jordan Saley, Stephanie Davila, Will Cheever, Cassandra Masonet, Sabrina Wu. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.